Well, welcome to another episode of the Minority Voice, and I'm your host, Jeff Vega, and I brought Jeff Mentag back as a guest. Remember we were talking about the Federalist Papers, First and Second Amendment, and I don't know about Jeff, I don't know if you know this, but YouTube said we were political, and so they suppressed the viewing of it because it's political. Now, this is our country. This is not political. Second Amendment's not political. It's in our Bill of Rights. I go figure.
Maybe we should have had a throwaway camera and we could have just demonstrated the use of the gun, and that would have, I don't know.
No, I think the fact that we showed it, the guns may have offset at them. So
that's displaying violence and aggression.
Yeah,
I'm certain.
It is. But hey, I'm glad to have you back and look forward to talking about our history, and that's why I brought you back, because I think there's a need in America to go back and do their due diligence and then do some homework on our founding, because I think if we can get America back to what our founding fathers put out there, we may be able to save this union, if you will. You think?
Let's think so. We were sharing and we said one of the things that I remember you saying that's marked in my mind one time was at one of the meetings the 13th district meeting, and you said it in one of our other settings, and then you said it, I think it was off camera, in very astute observation, that we need to have the kind of teaching as far as civics in our classroom, real actual civics, like Schoolhouse Rock, like how does a bill become a bill? What was the Constitution? Who were the writers? These kind of things, they don't teach this stuff really at any length in our schools today. And it's unfortunate. And even when they do talk about the Constitution, as you and I had mentioned before, you hear so much of the political, more of the opinionated view of the Constitution rather than letting the facts speak for themselves. They say, this is what it is. This is what they wrote. What is your observations? How do you feel about it? How do you feel about it? Letting the students learn to think and critically analyze for themselves, and that doesn't happen.
Critical thinking is out the door.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what you get is you get a politically slanted view, most of the time liberal, of what the Constitution was and what it was for. And I remember one time I had a Movado watch, which was one of my favorite watch. I paid like $1,200 for it, and a friend of mine became a pastor of a church, and I gave it to him. And he goes, "It's a beautiful watch, And you can look at a Rolex, and I can look at a beautiful Movado or whatever, and we can say, hey, look, it's handmade. It's got a Swiss crystal. It's got all these things. It's got an oyster shell. It's waterproof to 300 meters, and we can appreciate all that. That's great. But a greater appreciation comes when you take it apart, or you go to the factory and you see, wow, look at what this is made of. I mean, this is intricate. This is unique. There's nothing like this. These are some of the finest craftsmanship in the world. Much like sausage. If you all knew how sausage was made, you wouldn't eat it.
Yeah, you're right.
You certainly wouldn't. And so I said that to say this. We have the Constitution, and you can have all the views you want. But then we have the discussions that preceded the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, which the Founding Fathers argued back and forth, both the reasons for certain things and against certain things in the Constitution. And
let's step back. You and I know what the Federalist Papers
right.
are. But let me ask you, Dave. Dave, do you know what the Federalist Papers are? Were you taught?
No clue. Maybe, like briefly, but not enough to retain. Like, not that I retained it.
Okay.
I kind of like history a little bit in government, so I mean, and they didn't teach it in depth.
Okay.
This is a shame, because you know what? It's the sausage. It's how the Constitution came to be. These guys came from, of course, as we know, England. They came here. They came as colonies. They wanted their independence. They came from an oppressive government. They witnessed oppression throughout history. They went back. They looked at the Enlightenment. They looked at all these things. They studied different forms of government. They did a lot of reading of Montesquieu and all these other kind of early authors who discussed the Enlightenment and freedom and individual liberty and sovereignty and private property. Did you know that they viewed you, whoever you are that's watching out there, they viewed you as private property, you yourself. a sovereign individual. And when the government comes and uses confiscatory taxation to pay for let's say, for abortion or welfare, whatever it might be, they viewed that as the government then stealing private property. Your labor, your sweat, your equity is private property. And if we don't get a hold not only of that concept and what the Constitution meant, but go back and take a look to bolster what the Constitution meant, we may be in trouble. So it's our job to try to get this word out to you, to all of you listening, and to discuss among ourselves, how can we best get this word into the schools and to other people? Because we need to get hold. They're our rights. It's our job. It says it right there in the beginning of the Constitution, the preamble and declaration. It's our job to ensure that our liberties are being secured by our government. It's our job to petition our government for the redress of our grievances. We're not doing it.
Right, exactly. So when we look at the Federalist Papers, basically you had the Constitution was written, and the Federalist Papers were as a result of the anti-Federalist writings, right? And basically, correct me if I'm wrong, the Federalist Papers were a group of writings to explain the positive side, if you will, of the Constitution.
Yeah, one of the things that we have to remember is that when they come from England, they come from an all-powerful king. You know, the king just had to say so, yes, no. Kind of like China now has these social scores. It wasn't much different back then. You know, you were either part of the Church of England or you were some kind of heretic. You were either in this group or you were one. It wasn't quite as bad, but it was pretty totalitarian. And when they got here and said, oh, wow, you know, hey, this is pretty cool. We've discovered the new world. We want our independence. We don't want to go back to that. And these are well-educated men. And so what they did is they on their way to working the Constitution, as you said, they wrote these papers to argue for the Constitution. They were very fearful of an all-powerful centralized government. They were very fearful of tyranny. They were very fearful of factions and one versus the other. And they were careful to go very carefully, painstaking through these arguments to decide what is going to be best. What's the minimum necessary for this Constitution to protect the rights of the people and to set them up as God sees you, as a sovereign individual with rights given by God. If you would like, I can just read just a summary of what the Federalist Papers. It says the Federalist, commonly referred to as the Federalist Papers, is a series of 85 essays written by Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison between October 1787 and May of 1788. These essays were published anonymously under the pen name Publius in various New York State newspapers at the time. The Federalist Papers were written and published to urge New Yorkers to ratify the proposed United States Constitution, which was drafted in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787. In lobbying for the adoption of the Constitution over the existing Articles of Confederation, the essays explain particular provisions of the Constitution in detail. Now this is key. They explain in detail why they wanted particular provisions of the Constitution. For people out there who are listening who are saying, oh, the Constitution was for those white guys, or it didn't prohibit slavery, or it was a slave-holding document. No, this goes on to tell you exactly why they did what they did. It's none of those things. They didn't mention white people. They didn't mention European people. They didn't mention Hispanic people. They didn't mention black people. They didn't mention women. They mentioned the sovereignty of the individual. And that's key for us to understand, especially when we see what they wrote. But it says, for this reason, and because Hamilton and Madison were each members of the Constitutional Convention, the Federalist Papers are often used today to help interpret the intentions of those drafting the Constitution. About that. The papers were published primarily in two New York State newspapers, the New York Packet and the Independent Journal. Geez, we don't have newspapers today that would publish something like this. It would be some way off headline that wouldn't even tell us. But anyway, you can see in the summary there of what this was about. And it tells you specifically, today people use these Federalist papers. They're often used today to help interpret the intentions of those drafting the Constitution. Any of you who read the Bible understand that you can take a verse out of the Bible, and it could say, hey, you got to wear blue every Sunday. But is that what the whole chapter was
Right,
really
exactly,
saying? So context is king. And when we look at the Constitution, context is king. You can't just say, well, you don't need a Gatling gun to hunt deer. You don't need an AR-15. Well, that's not the context of why it was written, and you don't need to yell fire in a crowded movie theater, they say about the First Amendment. Well, that's not why it was written. It was political speech. And at the end of the day, that was so that we could have a free press that would hold the government, a check and balance against the government. And of course, we know today we don't really have that either.
Right. So Alexander Hamilton died in a duel against Aaron Burr. Do you remember that?
I do remember that you remind me of that, and I think that there was
those two had a little beef with each other, and it was because of Alexander that Burr didn't conceivably get the presidency, and Thomas Jefferson got it, and so they had a duel. And the interesting thing, and I don't know how true it is, but whatever I've read is that when they went there, Alexander, when he went to shoot, he purposely missed him, because he was an honorable guy, and he didn't have an all against. He just didn't think Burr was a character guy, and Burr said, "Too bad, dude," and he took him out. He wounded him, but he died. He died shortly after. And then when you look at John Jay, he was the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And
he was an incredible guy.
Yeah, brains. And he also negotiated the Treaty of Paris. Now, Dave, do you know what the Treaty of Paris is?
Yeah, no, it sounds familiar, but
it's been so long.
Yeah. Now, it's not with Paris Hilton, okay? I will tell you that. No, it's actually the ending of the Revolutionary War.
Right. Okay.
So basically, he negotiated that, and he was a signer of it.
And we had the French's help.
Oh yeah,
At that time. So
when you think about it, man, these guys, man, they were just, compare them to our politicians today.
If you look now, we look at Europe and we say, oh, they're like Casper Milquetoast, the European Union, or they're so polite, they don't want to make any waves. But if you look in France right now, they're starting to bust into vaccine clinics and burn down vaccine clinics, and they're violently overthrowing this lockdown mask. I just believe, and I hate to think that may be coming here, because they're just pushing and pushing and pushing.
And you know what? It's a good thing.
It is a good thing.
Because you know what? I see a trend as we'll wind this episode down. I see a trend in America where they've awoken.
Yes.
And you see it at township meetings, city council meetings, school board meetings, where people are saying, enough is enough. And they realize the parties are not there on their behalf.
His subordinates, Admiral Yamamoto's subordinates, came back to him after the raid of Pearl Harbor. And rather than being excited about what had happened, he said, "I'm afraid we've awoken a sleeping giant."
Yes.
And it was true. And we proceeded to kick the Japanese butts all the way back to Japan, and then some. Not that we're ever proud of war. War is hell. But it's you don't poke the bear. It's just
with this too, when you look back during that time we fought for independence, only about 3% of the population got in the fight.
Right.
That's it, 3%.
And this gets us back to the idea that you and I were talking about when it's the militia. It's, in the church, we could talk forever. In the church, you have over and over again the thought, in the Old Testament, you have God saying, "I have 700 that have not bowed the knee to the false idols, to Baal. And those that lap out of the pound will fight with me." And it was down to 300 men in Gideon. God always has a remnant. And in the last days, there'll be a remnant. Those who really believe that little tiny portion. And even here, you look at the politics of thing, they say about 30% or less are really the patriots that are really going to stand up. The others are somewhat, 30, 35% don't give a damn what happens.
Right.
And then the other ones in the middle are just kind of like either way, go along to get along. You have a very small percentage of people that actually that actually, this is played out everywhere. In the church, you have about 17 or 18% of the church that supports the whole work of the whole church. It's played out everywhere. You always have that small percentage, that remnant of people who are the real committed people. Only this time, I think that they've stepped on too many toes, and I think they're getting pushback from people they never expected it from.
That's a fact. Well, hey, Jeff, it's been good, and I want to bring you back again because I want to talk about, the last time I had you here, you talked about Federalist 46. Let's just touch on that one, and then maybe I'll bring you back and we'll talk about some other stuff too. But hey, it's been a pleasure, and I look forward to you. And folks, until next time, Joshua 24:15.
Amen.